Hey everybody, today Rahdo runs through his top 10 next step games. What do I mean by that? Well, here's the deal. There's a certain life cycle for most modern board game geeks, which is certainly what I describe myself as. They start out not knowing anything about modern designer board games, thinking there's nothing out there besides Monopoly and maybe Magic the Gathering. Maybe they've heard of Settlers of Catan, maybe not. But then somehow they find their gateway, some game that introduces them to the world of modern board games, and they say, wow, that's awesome. I want more. What should I get next? They're ready to go to their next step. And that's what I'm talking about now. What I've done is I have very subjectively picked what I think are arguably the 10 most popular, most commonly recommended gateway games on the market. The ones that everybody says, well, if you really want to learn what modern board games are like, try one of these. Those 10 games. And I'm suggesting that, hey, if you check those games out and you really liked them and you're wondering what should I do next, maybe try this next one. Like I said, this is all very, very subjective. I haven't done any hard and fast research, but I've got a pretty good idea that these 10 games I'm going to be next stepping off of are, if not the top 10, certainly some of them. And I'm also going to do it as a countdown from least recommended to most often recommended, which just really has nothing to do with anything, but I just like doing countdowns. So that's what it's all about. The important thing is for every one of these recommendations as a next step that I was thinking about is, right, I've got to recognize something in the base game that they must have liked. And so that has to be but I don't want the follow-up game, the next step, to just be a repeat of what they've already done, or just kind of, it has to be something new. It has to be something different. It has to be something that hopefully they'll find just as compelling, but that will make them say, yeah, this is working out pretty well. And if at all possible, this isn't always necessary, but ideally, it should just have a little bit more oomph to it. A lot of times these gateway games are pretty simple and straightforward, and so I'm hoping as well that this next game, which features something they must have liked in the first one, but introduces them to new, different stuff that hopefully they'll like, is also introduces them to a game that just has a little bit more weight. Pushes them a little bit harder because, well, certainly my goal is to get everybody playing the kind of games that Jen and I like. Bigger, heavier, deeper, more robust games, and to move away from just the light, simple, silly. Not that there's anything wrong with light, simple, silly, fluffy games, but hey, if you're ready for your next step, if you're ready for something a little bit heavier, well, here's some suggestions. Right, okay, then let's start counting down with what I'm guessing is the number 10 most commonly recommended gateway game out there. Sushi Go, the pick and pass card game. This is a card drafting game. There are so many card drafting games on the market, but Sushi Go and its sequel, I think Sushi Go Party, have become such big monster hits. Really, really successful. You see them all over the place, and they are, admittedly, a really great gateway game. But if you're done with Sushi Go and you're ready for the next thing, might I suggest Between Two Cities? Now, this is a drafting game, same as Sushi Go, which is to say, every round you're going to have, in Sushi Go, you have a handful of cards in your hand. You pick one that's going to be good for you, and then you give the rest to your neighbor. And meanwhile, your other neighbor gives you them, and then you pick one, and you keep cycling them around, and you're trying to collect the cards that are best for you, and trying to keep the cards that are best for your opponent away from them, and score the most points at the end of the game. And all the cards have different ways they score and stuff like that. Very simple, family-friendly, quick game. Between Two Cities is the same basic thing, but there's a few differences. One, instead of handing cards back and forth to each other, we're handing city tiles. And we use those tiles to build little cities. Housing building, office complexes, industrial factories, stuff like that. Pubs, taverns, parks, all kinds of things. So when I start out, I see, hey, I've got all these tiles, and unlike Sushi Go, I don't just keep one, I keep two. Because throughout this game, I am building a city to my left and to my right. That's why it's called Between Two Cities. I am personally sitting between the city to my left and my right. I'm going to take two of the tiles I've got and then hand the rest to my neighbor. And meanwhile, my neighbor is going to take two and hand the rest to me. Those two tiles, one of the tiles I add to the city to my right and one I add to the city to my left. I'm trying to build both of these cities at the same time. And here's the trick. That's what everybody else is doing too. You are sitting to my right, and what that means is you chose 2 tiles because you and I share control over this city. The one that's to my right and your left, we both want this city to be the best city in the game because that might win us the game. We are both going to be setting aside tiles and adding them to the city throughout the game. So we're kind of working together, but this is not a cooperative game. There can be only one winner. At the end of the game, my final score is, of my 2 cities, the one that scored worse. So I want both my cities to do really well, but I want my city to my right to be better than my opponent. Oh man, it's hard to describe, but it's when you're sitting down and playing, you're just trying to make the best cities you can. You're also trying to say, hey, you know what? When I hand the rest of my tiles to the player to my left, it's not necessarily a case of, okay, I want to make sure I don't give you anything good, because I want to give you a good tile that you'll add to the city that we share. But by the same token, I don't want to give you a tile that you'll add to the other city you've got that I don't care about. So there's this really tricky set of mind games where you are so involved. In all drafting games, there's always an element of what's called hate drafting, where do I take the thing that's good for me, or do I take the thing that would have been good for you and I don't want you to have? That's here as well, but it's more complicated than that, because I do want to give you good stuff because you and I are working on a city together. But I don't want to give you all the good stuff because I want your other city to be garbage. I want my 2 cities to be the 2 best in the world. And because if the city you and I work on together is great and the one on the other side is terrible, that means I'll beat you. And the same for the player on my other side. It's so cool. It's that same basic tile drafting, but there is so much more going on. Now, I should say, I'm a little bit nervous about this because this one is a big jump in terms of complexity. Sushi Go, all the different types of things you score have different rules. The same thing is true here. Different types of buildings score different ways and stuff like that. And there's a lot more going on, but man, if you think you're up for it, if you really like the drafting and you get to the point where as a player you're like, oh, I'm trying to think, and not only am I worrying about what I'm giving to them, but I'm worried about what they're going to give to them, and you're constantly really 3 steps ahead of everybody else, you might be ready as a gateway game to Between Two Cities. Right, now let's move on to number 9, Splendor. This has become such a hugely popular engine building game. Really simple, straightforward game of building cards into your tableau to generate gems so you can build more powerful cards, so you can score points, and that's basically what an engine building game is. The more things you add to your little contraption you're building, whatever it might be, the more powerful you become so you can add more stuff and score more points. Splendor is hugely popular, in large part because it has incredible production values. It's gorgeous to look at, it has these wonderful tactile pieces, and the game I'm suggesting as a next step off of Splendor maybe isn't quite as pretty, but man, for my money, it is such a cooler, more interesting and rich game. It is San Juan. This is another card game, first and foremost, like Splendor. It's all about cards and getting cards and adding them to your own tableau, and then being able to use those cards to become richer and more powerful so you can get more and more stuff and score more points. But that's where the similarities end, because where Splendor is a very abstract game. There's no concept of what these buildings are other than the fact that you keep getting, other than the fact, oh, they produce more and more and more gems. But imagine a Splendor where every building you take, hey, there were some points or what have you, but they all have special powers that will let you do different things. And as you get, but to get these cards in play, you basically, instead of just taking them from like a big central draft, you have them from your hand. And if I want to play this card, because it's got a really cool special power that will work with my engine to make me a more powerful, productive member, a member of this game, to play this, I have to get rid of a bunch of other cards. I have to toss all them away. Now, that is a very, very different feel in Splendor, where in Splendor, you're just always moving forward. You're building bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Here in San Juan, to build bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to make tough choices about what you're going to jettison, what you're going to throw away. And those are agonizing decisions, but in a good way. They really put you through the mental ringer and draw you in. But once you've made those decisions and you start getting these buildings, they don't just sit there and do very simple things. They can do really interesting, complex things, and they can combine with other buildings you might have made to do even more powerful stuff. They can combo together. And if all that weren't enough, there's another element as well. In Splendor, which again is just all about grabbing cards, putting them in front of you so you can get better and better at grabbing more cards and putting them in front of you. That's what you do in San Juan, but you do it in deeper, more interesting ways. Every round, there are a set of roles, like the mayor and the shipper and the builder and stuff like that. Everybody chooses one of those roles, which means they're very good at that thing, that action they can do, and everybody else who didn't get that role gets to do a weak version of that action. So there's this incredible level of interaction between players as well, where I'm hoping that you will do the building action this turn because I didn't. I did something else on my turn, and now that I've done that, I'm ready to build this card in my hand, but I'm hoping you choose build so that, you want to build some stuff, and then I'll be able to build things as well, even though it's not my turn. That level of interaction between players is so compelling and so interesting. San Juan, at first glance, might seem like, well, yeah, they barely have anything in common. Yeah, there's just a bunch of cards you have that you're building this little tableau of this engine in front of you. And that's true. But that's why it's a next step. I don't want your next step from Splendor to be just another Splendor or a Splendor expansion. I want to expand your mind and show you new things you can do. Cards that that represent buildings that give you resources can be so much more than what Splendor gave you. And San Juan is a brilliant way to introduce you to those concepts. And that's why it's my number 9 topic. Now let's move on to the number 8, Love Letter. Oh, so much love for Love Letter out there. Hugely, amazingly popular game. An incredible design feat because it does so much with just a tiny little deck of cards. And the whole game is about, hey, you know what, on my turn, I got these cards. I'm going to keep a card. I'm going to play a card. And what I'm trying to do with playing that card is to knock you out of the game. So I'm last person standing. But for me to be able to do that, I have to figure out what's in your hand. Because if I'm then smart enough to play the right card to knock you out or to force you out of the game, so that or to protect myself from you knocking me out, it's amazing how much there is game-wise in this tiny little deck of cards in Love Letter. So if you've really loved it and you're looking for something else, you're looking for a next step, something bigger with more going on, might I suggest Biblios, which is another game, which is the whole game is just basically a deck of cards. Actually, that's not entirely true. The game comes with a deck of cards, and it also comes with 5 really big, chunky, beautiful dice. Now, the dice serve no purpose in the game other than to be a score track for what the value of certain items are, and those items are on your card. Now, Love Letter is all about this very, very frank trying to figure out what's in your opponent's hand and playing the right card to mess them over. And that's where the interaction comes from in Love Letter. It's brilliant at what it does. Biblios has a different type of interaction between players that's maybe a little bit less destructive, a little bit more constructive, which for my mind makes it a superior title. Because when I get together with friends and family and loved ones, I want to engage in an activity where I'm making something as opposed to trying to prevent you from making something. And here's the way Biblios works. Instead of just on my turn having just 2 cards in my hand and I got to play one and hopefully try to mess somebody else up, instead, on my turn, I'm going to draw a series of cards from the deck. Now, these cards are full of wonderful, valuable resources, that are worth different amounts of points at different times in the game because, well, gold is always worth whatever it says. If it says 3 gold, it's worth 3 gold. But in this game, we are scribes in an ancient monastery, in a medieval monastery. So we're trying to write up books. So sometimes ink and pigment might be worth a lot. Sometimes parchment might be worth a lot. Or maybe parchment isn't worth a lot at all right now. The value of all these goods that go into making these books is constantly fluctuating. There's this market element to the game. Nothing like what you find in Love Letter. But on your turn, you're going to draw cards, one more than the total number of players. One of those cards you're going to keep for yourself. And of course, you want to keep the best card for yourself. The other cards you draw are going to go into a pot that all the other players will get to take from. So on your turn, you're going to give yourself a card, and you're going to give everybody else a card too. And you're also going to set a card aside into another pile that's basically going to be auctioned off in the second half of the game. The first half of the game, we are churches building up our resources, getting a bunch of cards that represent all the stuff we have, and potentially changing changing the value of those things when certain cards come into play. The second half of the game, all the cards that got put aside that nobody ended up getting are then going to be auctioned off one after another. And all the cards I collected in the first half, I am going to be using to win the cards that are available in the second half, with a goal towards having the most valuable collection of cards at the end of the game. So, the levels of interaction between you and other players in this game are off the charts. Now, this is a bigger stack of cards than Love Letter, but the reason I put this on here is because as amazing as Love Letter is with its whatever it is, like 12, 15 card deck, this has a much thicker deck, but it's even more amazing to me how much interactive gameplay there is. The first half of the game, I'm doing this little push your luck thing of, oh, I draw a card, do I want to keep this for myself, or am I going to put it in the pot so other players will get? This is a nice card, but it's not a great card. Should I put it out there so that one of you will get it? Or should I keep it for myself? Because maybe the next card I'm going to draw is a lousy card. But either way, I make that choice and then I draw another card and it's like, oh, I'm so glad I gave you the crappy card because now I'm going to keep this great card for myself. Those decisions you're making, you are making so many tough, agonizing decisions. That's what Love Letter is. Love Letter, every turn you just make one decision. Which card do I play? And maybe who do I play it on? In Biblios, you're going to make several decisions every turn that are just as tough, but they're all towards building something up. And then after that first half is over, the second half is a series of auctions. And auctions are so immensely interesting because you know what? I know what I've got. I know what I have put into that big deck. I know what's coming up. And so if there's a card that I really want in there, but another card comes up earlier. Do I bid a lot to get it, or do I save my money for the card that I'm waiting for? Everybody's making all these decisions. There's so much play interaction. It's an incredibly brilliant game. There's so much with just a deck of cards and admittedly some dice to keep track of values of resources. I am absolutely bonkers blown away by Biblios. And after having played Biblios, I can't imagine wanting to play Love Letter, because Love Letter is nice, but it's just so simple and on the surface. Biblios is so much deeper. That's why, to me, it's a great next step. But now, let's move on to Stone Age, a hugely popular worker placement game. For a lot of people, this is a very, very commonly recommended gateway. This is a worker placement game where you run a little caveman village, and the cavemen are your workers. You deploy to various spots on the board to do actions, to get resources, to build up your little caveman society. It's interesting. It used to be Stone Age was the go-to recommendation for worker placement games. These days, a lot of people recommend Lords of Waterdeep, which is another game where you've got your little workers and you deploy them to the board to get resources, to do stuff. Now it's in a kind of a Game of Thrones style King's Landing fantasy city, but you're still just sending workers around to do stuff. These are both excellent gateway games. Make no mistake. Jen and I own both of them. I've used them both very, very successfully in gateways. But we're not talking about the gateway. We're talking about the next step. Either of these very popular gateways, once you're done and you think, you know what, I really kind of dig this. This is really pretty awesome. Do you have any more recommendations? Maybe try Fresco. Fresco is very, very interesting because it is another worker placement game. Now you've got all your little workers, you're deploying them to the board once again to get the resources you need to build the stuff you need to build, just like the other ones. But there's one huge difference with Fresco. With those other worker placement games, everybody takes a turn. I'll put a worker, and then you'll put a worker, and then you'll put a worker, and then I'll put another worker, and then you'll put a worker. And we all are just very politely waiting our turn. And, oh, you went to the place, now I can't go there. Okay, I'll go somewhere else. That's fine. That's the basis of worker placement. Here's what Fresco does. Fresco, I've still got my workers. I know I want to send them out to the market or over to the theater or wherever. I've got all these different places I could send them to make them do actions I need to do. But I plan the spaces are going to go, the actions I'm going to do with them in secret. I figure out, right, I'm going to have this worker do this, and this worker do this, and this worker do this, and everybody's doing this at the same time in secret. You've got like these little shields that you keep track, and a little board that's kind of like a mini version of the main board that says, okay, here's how I'm going to place all my dudes. And then once everybody's done, everybody reveals at the same time. And the trick to playing this game well is knowing where you think your opponents are going to go, either staying away from them or getting to them first. Because another element of this game is turn order is very, very interesting. One of the first things you do every round is you decide when you're going to get up in the morning, which I just love. I think that's so cool and thematic, and really pulls you into the world, because are you going to sleep in late? That means if you and I both go to the market at the same time, and you got up early and I got up late, we won't know until we reveal. We lift up the shield and say, hey, here's where I sent my workers. Where did you send your workers? If I'm getting up late, chances are I got to assume I'm going to be the last person at the market, because everybody else will have gotten there before me. So maybe today is not a good day for me to go to the market. Maybe I should go someplace else. Trying to get into the mindset of your opponent, knowing where they're going to go, knowing where you can beat them, or knowing that, hey, if they went there first, and getting up late, of course, gives you a lot of extra benefits. If you get up early, you'll be cranky. You won't get to do as much during the day, but you'll be first to everything. If you get up late, you'll get to do more, but you'll be last to everything. And so that decision pushes this little worker placement programming thing. And it's so cool. It's so much fun. Jen and I absolutely adore it. Another reason Fresco is a really great gateway, or I'm sorry, a next step from gateways is, the first time you play Fresco, it comes with rules that are really no more complicated than a Lords of Waterdeep or a Stone Age. But the game comes with extra modules in the box. So if you find the game is, I want a little bit more. I want the game to challenge me more. I want there to be more interesting, complex things to try to leverage. You can add these extra modules and make the game grow with you. As you become a better gamer, the game can become richer and more deep and more exciting. Now, for most games, you can get that by going out and spending more money and buying expansions. Fresco is brilliant because it's basically got those expansions built in. And I absolutely love that. I love the game. This whole simultaneous worker placement, everybody reveals, like, oh my God, I can't believe you went there. I thought for sure you were going to go to the other place and I didn't go there. It's brilliant. I absolutely love it. It's a great next step. But now, let's talk about Dominion. Man, people love recommending Dominion as a gateway, and with good reason. I mean, it kind of invented the modern deck builder genre. It's an incredibly popular game, hugely satisfying, very easy to teach. A lot of people love it out there. And there's even good digital apps that will teach you how to play the game as well. So, if you've got a lot of Dominion and you thought that was really great, where do you go next? Well, of course, like most of these things, you can just buy an expansion for Dominion, but that's going to give you more of the same. If you want something really different, again, something that really surprises you and shows you a different side of the coin, might I suggest the Quest for El Dorado. Now, like Dominion, El Dorado is a deck building game, which is to say you've got a deck of cards, and over the course of the game, every turn you draw a bunch of cards. That represents what you can do this turn, and you're trying to buy more cards, put them into your deck so your deck becomes more powerful so you can do more powerful things. That is what deck builder is. Road to El Dorado does it as well. But where Dominion has all of that stuff happen kind of cerebrally, I'm amassing more wealth, but it's all just represented by cards in my deck. In the Quest for El Dorado, the strength of your deck, as you get more and more powerful cards in there, the end result of that strength is represented on the board, because in this game, players are all racing through the jungle to get to El Dorado. And so there's this board game element where, which is just an incredible addition to what is already an amazing game. Dominion is a fantastic experience. I highly recommend it to anybody. It's in my top 20 of all time. But adding this race board on top of that now suddenly makes it less cerebral, more in your head. You're just having to imagine all these things you're doing. Now the cards you build are cards that let you bushwhack your way through the jungle or climb mountains or ford rivers and stuff like that. And as you draw those cards at the beginning of your turn, say, okay, these are the cards I'm going to have. I could use these cards to buy more cards to put into my deck, or I could use them to move my little guy through the jungle and race you to get to El Dorado first. It's a brilliant game. An absolute sea change on what it means to be a deck builder. And it's a lovely, fun time. Highly recommend it. Great next step, the Quest to El Dorado. But now let's talk about the King of Tokyo, or the King of New York for that matter. Monstrously popular game where players every round are representing big, gigantic kaiju monsters trying to destroy the city of Tokyo or the city of New York, and also trying to destroy each other along the way. And you do that by rolling dice Yahtzee style, and rolling and then re-rolling, trying to get the right results on those dice so that you can do what you want to do. And what you normally want to do is either destroy the city if you're in the city, and if you're not in the city, you want to destroy your opponent who is in the city. And just totally knock them out, wipe them off the face of the earth so that you can get into the city and start destroying it to score points. It's a cool, clever game. I understand why so many people like it, but I'll be honest, I've played it and it's like, there's just not that much there. It's a very simple game, and it's really just a whole lot of rock'em sock'em robots. I hit you, you hit me. Who lives the longest? It's fine. I get why people like it. But if you found yourself enjoying it, you thought, hey, this is really cool. I just thought dice must have been like Yahtzee or Monopoly. I didn't think there's anything really cool you could do with dice. But then this game showed me I could use dice to have these big epic combat fights between giant monsters. Well, this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but stick with me. I'm going to suggest you try out Escape, Curse of the Temple. This is another game where you're rolling dice, and you're rolling dice trying to get the symbols you need to do whatever it is you want to do. In Tokyo, like I said, it was destroy your opponents. Try and literally kill them. That's what you're trying to do all the time. In Escape, you're rolling those dice to get the symbols you need to literally try to escape a temple that's collapsing all around you, just like an Indiana Jones movie. And the thing is, you're not rolling those dice trying to destroy your teammates. You're rolling those dice trying to help your teammates, because we're all working cooperatively. We're all together trying to get out of here alive, because if one of us doesn't make it out, we all lose. And so you're rolling your dice, and instead of trying to get claws to hit your opponents, you're trying to get boots that mean, hey, I can move from room to room, and I can explore, and I can try to find the exit, and stuff like that. But occasionally you roll curses, and you're like, oh no, my die is locked up. I can't roll because my die is cursed. That's where your teammates come in, because they can come into the room where you're in. They can roll dice to help you break the curse you're in. So instead of rolling dice to hurt everybody, you roll dice to help everybody. I love that. And King of Tokyo is a big, cinematic, action-packed game. So is Escape. I think if you like the big monsters trying to destroy each other, you might dig the Indiana Jones trying to get out alive vibe as well. But now you're working with everybody instead of against everybody. There's one thing I didn't mention though. One very big change. As if, changing everything else wasn't enough. In this game, there's a timer. You only have 10 minutes to get out of that temple. And so you're not just it's my turn. Okay, I'll roll the dice, and then I'll re-roll the dice, and no, I'll re-roll this one again, and hey, that's my choice. Now let's see what happens. In this game, no. You're rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. You roll the dice as fast as humanly possible, because you've only got 10 minutes to get out. And that creates such an incredible amount of action. You can imagine King of Tokyo as this big action-packed extravaganza, big gigantic kaiju monsters ripping each other up. This game, you don't have to imagine the action, you feel it. You feel the tension, because the game actually comes with a CD, although you can download MP3s as well. That's a soundtrack. There's music, there's sound effects, and there's events that will happen during the game that everybody has to work together, roll those dice as fast as possible. Man, Escape is so much fun. And while I don't know, I'd be a little hesitant to make that be somebody's gateway game, because it's a lot to ask of players the first time they play. There's a lot that goes on. But if you've gotten good at King of Tokyo and you're looking for something new, and maybe something a little bit different, something that might surprise you, I cannot strongly recommend enough Escape, Curse of the Temple. But now, let's move on. Right, I forgot to put the picture of, right, so there's your dice, you roll them, and you go through the dungeon. Sorry. But let's move on now to the next thing. Catan, or as it used to be known, Settlers of Catan. Such a big gateway for so many players, and understandably so. I mean, it's almost as big as Monopoly these days. I don't think there are still other games that get recommended more as a gateway, but Catan is a brilliant gateway game. It's pretty easy to learn. Chances are you know somebody who knows how to play it, so they can teach you, and it really introduces you to just what a modern board game can be, because it's a very sharp design. But once you've had enough, and you don't want to trade wood for sheep anymore, maybe you want to try something else, I'd suggest Valeria Card Kingdom, which is a funky choice, but here's the connection. And of course, in Settlers of Catan, you're trying to build a network of roads and cities and stuff like that, and you're doing that by gathering resources. And the resources you gather are every round a die gets rolled, and if it's it's 2 dice get rolled, and whatever the sum is, that's what's going to get activated. If they sum to a 4, that means all the tiles with the number 4 activated, and that means, hey, maybe I can get some sheep that I can trade with you for wood or something like that. Valeria Card Kingdom has that same basic notion of every turn, players are going to roll dice, and that's going to activate a lot of stuff, but there's no board. Instead, players are effectively, instead of trying to build stuff out into the world and cut players off, make it tougher for each other to build and whatnot, instead, players are building their own little network of cards. And these cards do different things depending on what the dice. You roll the dice, and hey, if you rolled a 7, your cards that have the 7 on it will get to do whatever their action is. If you rolled a 4, your cards with a 4. And it's not just you, everybody's cards will activate on your turn when you roll those dice. So you have that same basic core dice generate stuff mechanism of Catan, but it's so much more flexible because all these cards do wild, crazy, different things. It's not just that, oh, well, all they do is just generate more of the lumber or the sheep or the wheat or whatever it is, and then, okay, well, I didn't get what I want. Maybe I can trade with you to do the thing because I got this sacred thing I want to build. Instead, I've got these cards in front of me, and they're doing wild, crazy things. And over the course of the game, one of the main things I do is the resources I get from my cards when they fire is that lets me buy more cards and bring them into my collection of cards. So I can start building up a thing that specializes. Like, you know what? I want a lot of cards that are going to fire when I get a 5. And so a lot of times I won't get anything, but hey, when that 5 comes around, it's going to be awesome. Or I spread out, and I'm getting covered when everything gets rolled, but I'm not getting as much stuff. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of control you have. And the nice thing is you get to build this yourself. It's a very, very different experience. It's that same core idea of every turn the dice get rolled, everybody potentially gets a payout, depending on what they personally got. But that's just the beginning. And these two games go in very, very different directions. Different settings, different look, different style, different levels of interaction, but still that same core. So if you liked that in Catan, you might want to check out Valeria Card Kingdom as a different way to skin that cat. Then, okay, Carcassonne, man, very, very. I think I've lost track. I think this is my number 3. My guess at the number 3 most commonly used gateway game, with good reason. It's a brilliant tile laying game where everybody's putting tiles out, building up this big countryside and claiming plots of land and trying to score the most points. Brilliant, brilliant game. But hey, if you're done with that and you want something a little bit different, how about a different approach to tile laying? How about the Isle of Skye? Which is very, very interesting because you're still trying to build a plot of land with tiles that wouldn't look out of place in Carcassonne. They've got roads on them, and and they've got different types of environments, and you try to make sure they connect so that the roads line up. Although interestingly, you don't have to. You have a little bit more freedom with how you want to snap these things together, which is cool right in and of itself. But there's a few key differences between Isle of Skye and Carcassonne. One is everybody's not building their own a big communal thing, because Carcassonne can get really mean, really nasty. It can be all about, oh, you thought you were going to make a lot of points off of that field over there, didn't you? Well, you know what? I've got a couple guys over here, and I'm just going to work my way in and steal all that from you. All those points you thought, yeah, they're gone. They're mine now. It's a big, big part of Carcassonne. In Isle of Skye, everybody's building their own little slice of heaven, and you don't have to worry about anybody destroying any of your stuff. You can focus unimpeded, and that gives you a lot more control. And for my money, it's a much more satisfying end result. But there's more as well. Really, at the end of the day, the only thing that's alike between these games is, hey, I do have tiles and I put them down. In Carcassonne, at the end of your turn, you just draw a tile. And like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to figure out where I'm going to put this tile next turn. Actually, that's not even true. Officially, you do it at the beginning of your turn. I draw a tile and I figure out where to put this. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's what Isle of Skye does. At the beginning of your turn, you draw several tiles, depending on the number of players. Actually, wait a minute. I've only played as a 3. Yeah, you draw several tiles. I think it's 3. And you don't just immediately take those tiles. Instead, you put those tiles in front of you, And behind a screen, you determine what you think the value of those tiles are. Basically you're giving up points to get those tiles. And you might say, oh, that tile is perfect for me. I think it's really valuable. I'm going to give that one a value of 3. That tile, I don't really care about it. And I know nobody else really cares about it. I'll give it a value of 1. And oh, this tile, I want this tile destroyed. I don't want this tile to fall into your hands because it would be perfect for you and I don't need it. So you draw these tiles and then in secret, you decide the fate of these tiles. And then what happens, and everybody else is doing that with the tiles they drew. Then everybody reveals the tiles and what you've done is you have opened up a shop. One of those tiles you destroyed, but the other tiles, your opponents now have the opportunity to buy from you. And so you've got this really tough choice. I want this tile for myself. But by me putting these coins down, it says how much I'm going to have to pay to get this tile. I want this tile. I don't want to spend a lot, so I'll just put a single coin out. I'll get it cheap. But if you do that, then chances are one of your opponents will say, oh, that tile's so cheap, I'll buy it for $1. And it's only, I wanted that tile. So make the tiles really expensive. But if you do that, then you're like, oh, but I can't afford this tile. It's too expensive. But you scare away your opponents from buying it from you. Although the beautiful thing is if they decide to buy it from you anyway, they just gave you all that money, and now you're going to have more money you can use in a future turn. There is so much more going on with Isle of Skye. At its heart, it's still just about, hey, ultimately I'm going to get the tiles I'm going to get, and I'm going to add them to my tableau, and I'm ultimately going to score those. But the way I get them is so different, so much deeper. And also, the way I score them is very different too, because Carcassonne, it's the same every time. You score towns this way, you score roads this way, you score fields this way, you score chapels this way, whatever. Isle of Skye, every time you play, as part of setup, you put out randomly generated objectives. So one time you play, mountains might be really important. The next time you play, mountains might not be worth anything. So every time you play, you're going to get a very, very different feeling game as well. It's super sharp. I love it a lot. It is a bit of a jump in complexity and whatnot. But like I said, if you've gotten really good at Carcassonne and you really love it and you want something more, Isle of Skye might be a good choice. But finally, folks, let's talk about Pandemic. My personal gateway game, the game that turned me into a gamer, well loved. People readily recommend it, and with good reason. It's an amazing gateway game. Everybody working together to save the world. It's kind of an action-adventure board game where you're jet-setting around and trying to stop the spread of viruses that threaten mankind and trying to find cures for them, and everybody works together, and you either win or you lose. It feels like a big budget movie come to life. It's great. I absolutely love it. So what do you do when you're looking for something else? Well, like always, you could get expansions. Heck, you could get Pandemic Legacy, but I'm not taking the easy way out. I want you to try something a little bit different. I might suggest the Big Book of Madness, which is such a, whoa, where the heck did that come from? But stick with me. Here's the deal. After you've played Pandemic a lot, of course, it's a cooperative game. That's what really makes it special, that everybody is so... The success in Pandemic is all about working together, coming up with plans, being in the right place at the right time to get the job done. But here's the thing. In Pandemic, everybody's still kind of an independent agent. And a lot of times, I'm working with you, let's rendezvous at this place so I can give you this card or whatever. But a lot of times, you know what, I'm just going to be off in Asia just doing cleanup work. I'll see you guys in a few rounds. I'm not, whatever you guys are doing, I don't even know. I'm just focusing on my one thing here. The Big Book of Madness is interesting for a couple of reasons. It is also a cooperative game. Everybody's working together in this game, not to stop the spread of disease in the modern world, but instead to stop a bunch of monsters from escaping from the Big Book of Madness in a Harry Potter style, Hogwarts-esque school for witchcraft and wizardry. Everybody's a student. We know how to cast a couple of spells. We've foolishly opened a book that lets all these monsters out, and we have to work together to stop the monsters and close the book before the school is destroyed. Fair enough. Cool. And again, the key thing that connects it to Pandemic is we all work together. We succeed or fail as a unit. But there's a couple of things that are very, very different about the Big Book of Madness. One, there's no board. There is no world where everybody is like, okay, well, I'm going to move over here and then I'm going to fly over there and whatnot. All of that's gone. You can imagine this entire game just taking place in one room. Everybody's together all the time. It's not like every once in a while you and I will work together. You and I work together every turn. And the other thing is, because we're all together in this tight space, fighting these monsters together, and we're all students, we don't really know our spells that well. we are constantly helping each other. Oh, you've got a spell you want to cast in your hand of cards, because this is a deck builder. Like earlier I was talking about deck builders. This is another deck builder where you draw cards in your hand, you're like, oh, I want to cast a spell. I don't have the resources I need to do it. You do. Would you mind using those? Would you mind playing that card to help me on my turn to do what I need to do so that I can get this done, so I can stop this monster or buy this other card that will make me more powerful, whatever it might be? And you're like, and you say, yeah, of course I will. We're in this together. I will help you on your turn. And so you, in this game, unlike Pandemic, you are helping your teammates all the time. The amount of interplay between players is through the roof. It's absolutely amazing. Again, because we're all together all the time. The threat is right there in our face. And we don't have to travel halfway around the world to help each other. We're just there all the time. But here's the thing. You say, yeah, okay, I'll spend a couple of my cards to help you. And I go ahead and, yeah, boom, I did a really great thing. It was an awesome turn, blah, blah, blah. Now it's your turn and you're like, oh, I gave away my cards. I helped you. Now I can't do anything. Well, I guess I could do this if, and then that's where I step in, because now all of a sudden I can help you. It's brilliant. It's absolutely lovely. This is a gorgeous, lovely production of a game. I should warn you, it's also a very challenging game, probably tougher than Pandemic, unless you play Pandemic at Legendary level, so that's something to know going in. But the feel of camaraderie is still there, working together to overcome seemingly unbeatable odds. But the fundamental shift is, by getting rid of the board and just having this whole game exist in the cards in our hand, and allowing us to interact with each other non-stop, it creates such a different co-op experience that I really do think it's a great next step to show you something else. Co-ops don't have to be what you think they are. Most modern cooperative board games really do borrow, beg, borrow, and steal from Pandemic, the same basic structure, moving around the world, every once in a while rendezvousing with people and using actions and stuff like that. Big Book of Madness is so different, and that's why I think it's a great next step. But now, folks, the last game, the #1 most readily recommended gateway game of all time, at least by my reckoning, is, of course, Ticket to Ride. And if you are done playing Rummy, drafting cards, and putting little trains on the track, and you want something else to pass the time with your friends and family, check out Suburbia. Oh my gosh, I love this game. Here's why I recommend this as a next step. One, it's set in the real world, as is Ticket to Ride. And while, I mean, maybe you're going to love Ticket to Ride mostly because you're a real devotee to trains, I think Ticket to Ride in part is so successful because, well, hey, everybody can appreciate this. Everybody can understand. It's not some far-flung fantasy universe or science fiction-y thing. It's just, oh, it's just trains. I get it. Everybody understands trains. In Suburbia, it has an equally accessible and engaging premise. In this game, you're building a city, just like the famous computer game SimCity. I think if you enjoyed Ticket to Ride because of its thematic trappings, chances are you'll like Suburbia too. Because I like building a train network, I like building a city network. That's cool. But the other big thing about Suburbia that made me pop in my head is, of course, a big part of what Ticket to Ride is about is most of your turns, you're just going to be collecting cards, trying to get this perfect hand of cards. And there's a bunch of cards out there, and, oh, am I going to take that card? Am I going to take that card? I don't like any of those. I'll draw a blind and hopefully get the card I like, and just slowly over time build up. Now, this game has something similar. Instead of getting cards, you're getting tiles, and you're going to use those tiles to build up your suburb in this big interconnected city. Fair enough. And at first glance, it might seem kind of similar. Hey, all the tiles are laid out there, just like the cards are laid out there in Ticket to Ride. But it's not that simple. Because the position, imagine Ticket to Ride, where you can't just take whatever card you want. The cards that have been around the longest that nobody wants, they're the cheapest. The cards that have just shown up, they're very expensive. And if you really want them, you've got to pay through the nose. But chances are everybody wants those. The reason this one's so cheap is because it's been around because nobody wants it. So are you going to take that card that is cheaper and you can afford, or not card, that tile, and build with it, or are you going to spend more money? So right off the bat, the drafting of cards, or the drafting of tiles in this game, has some resemblance to the drafting of the cards in Ticket to Ride, but it's instantly more rich and engaging. It's tougher, more exciting decisions to make. But then the other thing is, that I thought was an interesting overlap here, is the interaction. If you get good at Ticket to Ride, it's ultimately crucial that you start playing bearing in mind, oh, I see what you're doing. I see where you have built up. You're starting to build your own little network of rail lines there, aren't you? And boy, I bet you you really want to fill in that line between Chicago and Dubuque. Dubuque is not on the map. I can't remember the names of, Chicago and Indianapolis or something like that. You really need to connect that, don't you? I bet you do, because I can see that's your big goal. You're trying to connect all these things. You know what? I don't think that's going to happen, because I'm going to make that connection and now you can't do it. Ticket to Ride is, at its heart, once you get good at it, it's a fairly cutthroat game where players are constantly trying to figure out what their opponents are trying to do and then cut them off while still not being cut off themselves. It's a brilliant game, don't get me wrong. But, I don't know, the more Jen and I played it, the less we enjoyed it because of that. Suburbia is interesting as well, because here's the deal. I pay attention to that suburb you're building over there instead of that rail line you're building. Not because I want to destroy it. Not because I want to cut it off, but because, hey, you've built certain buildings. And because you've built those buildings, if I build this building, I will get a huge benefit. It's a positive level of awareness that I have. Like, you might have built a bunch of restaurants. At some point, I might have the opportunity to literally build a slaughterhouse that could then provide you with meat for your restaurants. If nobody's built any restaurants, that abattoir is of no value whatsoever. But if other players have, you better believe I want to build it, because then I will get a benefit from what you have done without me having to destroy what you have done. I really appreciate that level of interaction a lot more. Although that said, interestingly, if you like that kind of cutthroat nature in Ticket to Ride, where no, I like going out of my way to really hit my opponent, you still have a way to do it, because it comes back to that tile draft. Because there might be a tile coming and it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and I'm like, oh, I don't particularly want to build that, but I bet you do. I bet that's going to be great for you. You know what, on a turn, I'm going to end up taking that, not to build it, but instead I can flip it over and just turn it into a lake that beautifies my little suburb and keeps you from getting what you want. So, Suburbia, you can have, but if I'm doing that, chances are I'm not building something that would have been good for me. I'm only doing it to stop you. So, do I make those moves to stop you, or do I make those moves? It's not always quite so clear cut. If you really want to go out of your way to hit other players, well, that's the strategy that you have to follow pretty heavily. And yeah, it works really, really well. It's a great game. It's fun, it's satisfying, it's compulsive. At the end of the game, when you sit back and say, this is a suburb I built, one of the things I love about it, and you can't say this about Ticket to Ride, is at the end of Ticket to Ride, you sit back and say, this is the network I built. See, it's on a little card. I get 13 points, or 30 points, or whatever. That's the story. There's no story there. At the end of Suburbia, when I sit back and say, look at what I've done. Yeah, it scored me a lot of points, but there's a story here. Early on, I built the university, and then I built some cheap housing, and then I built some, a stadium. And over time, I became a college town. Whereas you just really focused on lakes and parks, and you beautified, made this really wonderful artisanal town. Your city tells a story, and that's something you don't get out of Ticket to Ride. And I think that if you enjoyed Ticket to Ride and you want something more, there's a lot that Suburbia has on all kinds of fronts. At the first glance, it has a little bit of similarity. It has the same kind of real-world appeal, but it has drafting to get cards and hopefully getting cards you need. But man, there's so much more. It's such a brilliant, brilliant design. I absolutely love it. And so, like I said, it might be a next step you might want to consider. And that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. Whew, okay. Hope you have a very, very nice day. And if you want to know a little bit more, like always, watch for my upcoming or listen for my upcoming podcast at podcast.rahdo.com. I'll revisit this because for every one of these, I had an alternate suggestion, at least one, sometimes 2 or 3 alternate suggestions I could have made. We'll talk about some more of that in the podcast. But otherwise, have a very nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.